Alright all, and welcome back to a new video, and this is a video I have been looking forward to doing for quite a while now, and it is my national hunt horses to follow for the upcoming 2020/2021 season, both in Ireland and over in England. I've put together a list of 15 horses. I know I've done this video 2 years in a row now, doing 10 horses to follow, and overall it's been of good success with the likes of Espoir Delaine, put up in the first year's videos, and Santini was put up in the first year's videos and stuff like that. So overall they seem to have gone down well. As I say, I'm always a massive fan of getting a bit of national hunt discussion in, and hopefully this can lead to it. What I'll do is I'll put a link down in the description if you're not maybe a massive fan of listening to them, or you'd prefer to read. I've put together a written article with the exact same horses and a little bit more in-depth analysis, I suppose, on each horse. There's probably a couple hundred words on each horse on the post. So if you want to have a look at that, that will probably be the first thing in the description below. But there are a fair few of you that do like watching the videos, hopefully, and we will crack on into it. I just want to say, before we get into it, this year, you might think these are slightly rogue, these 15 horses. They're probably not 15 horses that you'd particularly be thinking of, but they're being picked for a certain reason. I'm not saying by any means these are horses that are going to be winning races come Cheltenham or Aintree, but they might be very profitable to follow throughout the year, and that's the hope, is that we're going to follow horses that win races throughout the year. And I'd like to hope, looking at all 15, that all 15 of them have the ability to go and win at least one race. Starting off with number 1, and these are just being done in alphabetical order as it is in the blog post itself. And starting off with number 1, Cedarwood Road for Garota Lachlan, owner Chris Jones. This 5-year-old I think will look a really, really good proposition over fences in a few years' time. His novice hurdle year last year was actually pretty good for a horse of his for the horse of his kind of physique and stature, considering chasing is the game, and considering he was probably pretty mindfully handled last year as well. Having come midfield in a Fairyhouse maiden, he went on to win a maiden hurdle at Leopardstown on Stephen's Day by 11 lengths. Beat a few nice horses that day, the likes of Fusain, Arthurian Fame, Jungle Junction, who have all gone on to win races since, and then won the King's First Novice Hurdle, a listed race at Naas just before Cheltenham, when beating the highly regarded Beacon Edge of Noel Meads. He stayed on very well that day. I'd say in time, a step up from 2 miles will see this horse to best effect, and I'm really looking forward to seeing this horse go chasing. It was pretty clear to see last year that they were minding him for going chasing the following year. He didn't take up any engagements at Cheltenham. The trainer Garota Lachlan was quite keen to make sure that this horse wasn't overfaced early in his career. And this is an up-and-coming trainer, and Chris Jones has also gone and put Cour Sublime in this trainer's hands, so he obviously backs him very highly, and it'll be interesting to see what he can do. I think Cedarwood Road is a really good horse in the making. Number 2 on the list is a mare called Vino for the Dermot Anthony McLaughlin stable, owned by Mrs. PJ Conway. This was quite hard from the Dermot McLaughlin stable, because I'm obviously such a big fan of Captain CJ, and Captain CJ hopefully might win a few staying handicaps this year in Ireland. But this mare, it kind of reminds me of Santa Rosa last year, and to be honest, I wasn't that far away from putting Vino up as an anti-post bet for the mare's novice hurdle at 33 to 1. I think there are worse anti-post bets out there than this mare. She finished second on racecourse debut and landing a few nice each-way bets at Navan, behind Julie Stowaway, who ended up coming 7th in the Champion Bumper. Third that day was Ballyadam, who potentially is a superstar for Gordon Elliott, and backed that up when winning a pretty muddling race at Down Royal by 4.5 lengths. The form is pretty much untested. The 5th in that race was actually coming to win a maiden hurdle a few weeks ago, I think at Clonmel or Thurles, and fell at the last. Unfortunately couldn't be saved. Bold Enough, I think his name was, for the Henry de Bromhead stable. So that was the only piece of form that's come out of the race. So it is untested, but she won that very nicely, and the form of her first day at the office looks pretty strong in my book, and I think she should take decent rank in mares novice hurdles this year. Number 3 is a potential bumper horse slash novice hurdler coming from the point-to-point fields, and it's a horse called Doc Picked Me. He's gone over to be trained by Harry Whittington, part of one of the Jockey Club racing syndicates, the Cheltenham and South West Syndicate, which is quite highbrow from what I can imagine. This horse was picked up for 75 grand at the Cheltenham Festival sale this year after winning a Ballycahan point-to-point for Elmarie Holden and Paul Holden. And you'll notice, because I think I will be hopefully putting in a little screen grab of like the Racing Post kind of fact file of the horses, and I think the Racing Post still have this horse under the care of Elmarie Holden. She has gone to Harry Whittington, I can confirm that. And was very impressive in that point-to-point, actually, coming from last to first under Derek O'Connor, showing a decent turn of foot, turning into the straight, and got the better of 2 pretty well-regarded horses, a horse called Patroclus, and the third was a horse called Gaston Phoebus. Now, those 2 also went to the Cheltenham Festival sale, which Patroclus sold for 150 grand, and Gaston Phoebus for 100 grand. So Doc Picked Me perhaps is being rated as the less of the 3, but I think that race is being obviously viewed by shrewder people than me as a pretty strong heat. And I'm going to be really interested to see how he can do for Harry Whittington. Harry Whittington has earmarked one of the Class 2 bumpers at the Cheltenham showcase meeting as a likely first starting point for this horse. So he's obviously been showing something at home if they're going to take a plunge at a Cheltenham bumper so early in his career. And hopefully he can do quite nicely. Number 4 on the list is our Willie Mullins representative, and it's Elphie, probably the mare that goes under the radar. And of course, Willie has lost Stormy Ireland, so he's going to have to go and win these mares' races across Ireland before the mares' hurdle with some horse. And Elphie looks a pretty decent candidate for it. Third in the mares' hurdle last year behind Honeysuckle and Benny de Jew. There's no getting away from the fact she is comfortably held on form by the top mares, and like Honeysuckle, Benny de Jew, probably Epatante as well. But with so many different options, with the likes of the Stayers hurdle for Benny de Jew, maybe chasing for Honeysuckle, the mares hurdle may open up, and I think Elphie actually poses maybe slightly more solid claims than Concertista personally. I think she's a real game mare. I think it's more of a staying contest than the mare's hurdle was this year, would have suited her, because I think she does stay very well and she's a bit gutsy, and I think she'll win an awful lot of races this year. She might be a little bit short at Grade 1 level, but she sure should be winning a few Grade 2s and Grade 3s along the way. Number 5 is from the Mouse Morris Yard, and it's a horse called French Dynamite, owned by Rob Coore. Was sold for a big 165 grand out of Donegal Doyle's yard after winning a Tralee point-to-point. And Mouse Morris, I suppose, is more affectionately known with bringing his horses through over time and probably developing them into better staying chasers. And this horse is a staying chaser in an awful lot of respects with the way he goes about things. But he managed to win 2 novice hurdles last year. He won a maiden hurdle beating Trevenna by a length and a half, who's obviously won a race since for Peter Fahey, and beat the Boss's Oscar in a Thurles novice hurdle, and the Boss's Oscar went on to finish 5th in the Martin Pipe. Was outgunned in the Laurels and Ace novice race, which Envoy Len won. He wasn't good enough that day, and also came 4th, only beaten 5.5 lengths by 5 o'clock in a Grade 3 at Thurles over 2.5. I think this horse will be seen to best effect over fences, probably 3 mile fences down the line, and I really hope this horse will do well. As again, Mouse Morris brings them along steadily over time. This horse may stay in Ireland. He might be quite shrewdly placed, but hopefully he can pick up a few bits of prize money. Number 6 is a Fitzhenry for Paul Nolan and JP McManus. Probably one of the more exposed horses on this list. He's a 141 rated handicapper, but I still think there's a little bit of wiggle room in that mark for him to win one of these big handicap chases in Ireland. You know which races he's going to go for. The likes of the Troy Town, the Paddy Power, maybe the Thyestes, and the 2 mile 5 handicap chase at the Leopardstown Dublin Racing Festival. So there's an awful lot to like about knowing these things, and even though he was so close last time out, and he has been raised, I think, £7 since the start of last year, and he obviously didn't win one of those big handicaps, is a little bit of a concern. He hasn't won a race since, I think, February 2018 when beating Last Encounter at Naas. But I do think there is just something about me that tells me that one day he'll get his day in the sun, in the Troy Town or the Paddy Power, one of these big races. And I think he's not handicapped out of things off a mark of 141, in my opinion, and hopefully he can put in another good year's work. Number 7, an absolute favourite of mine, Gallant Joe for Ollie McKiernan and the Keep the Faith Syndicate. This is a really good horse, I think. He was second behind Mellon in a beginner's chase last year before they rolled the dice with the Irish Arkle and he came third running a big race. I really wanted him to go over and run in the novices handicap, but that was they didn't go for that. They ran at Naas in a Grade 3 novice chase, and he was very unlucky. He finished third, beaten only a half length by Royal Rendezvous and Minister for Sport. I think he probably didn't find quite as much off the bridle as you'd like to have hoped that day, but perhaps maybe the reapplication of cheek pieces might see this horse to good effect. He won the King's First Novice Hurdle with cheek pieces on, and that may come down the line. He's still a maiden over fences, so hopefully he might go out and win a beginner's chase before tackling competitive handicaps or maybe even Grade 2, Grade 3 races. Number 8 on the list is Gordon Elliott's Grange Clare native with the Gigginstown Silks. This point-to-point recruit was sold for 125 grand after winning a point-to-point for Dennis Murphy. Won on Bumper Jabu when I backed him at Punchestown. I was there at Punchestown when he beat Jungle Junction under Lisa O'Neill. He then was thrown in the deep end in a Grade 2 novice hurdle at the end of last year, finished 8th. Probably the less said the better, he just wasn't good enough on that day. He reappeared in a maiden hurdle at Goran last week and fell at the last down the back when he was a long odds-on favourite for that maiden hurdle. Obviously, he's got to prove that didn't take any effect, and hopefully it hasn't. But a real kind of, I suppose, sneaky feeling of mine is that this horse may be Gordon's Martin Pipe horse this year. He's that type of horse that he's got a bit of class, but he's probably not quite up to winning Grade 1, Grade 2 novice hurdles. He's probably a Grade 3/good handicapping type. And if he's campaigned effectively, I think this horse could run in the Martin Pipe and could run a big race. Number 9 on the list is Good Time Johnny for the Tony Martin yard. He was sold out of John McConnell's yard for 61 grand after coming second to Fantasio Dalen of Gordon Elliott's. And since then, he finished third in a Leopardstown bumper behind Risk Factor, which is obviously decent form in the book. He went on to land an absolute coup over in Musselburgh when him and the Mouse Doctor put on a double for Tony Martin. And then he finished mid-div in the Champion bumper when given an awful lot to do from the rear of the race. And he wasn't quite good enough to get involved. With him being trained by Tony Martin, you don't know what way he's going to go down. Perhaps he could land a big handicap hurdle down the line, or perhaps he might take a fairly high rank over novice hurdles this year. I think he's a horse of a lot of ability. I do love these Tony Martin horses that travel so well in their lovely sheepskin noseband. And I just think this horse could do pretty well this year, and the purchases for 61 grand could end up being a shrewd piece of business for Tony Martin. Number 10 is a horse I really quite like in Jason the Militant for Henry de Bromhead and Peter Michael. I think this is a really nice horse, actually. He's got a very similar profile in some respects to Captain Guinness, and Captain Guinness has been well found by an awful lot of people as being a real promising novice chaser. And even though I can't confirm Jason the Militant is going novice chasing, I'd assume, given connections, that he will be this year. And he's the type of horse that I'm really looking forward to seeing on the front end over 2 miles, being allowed to attack his fences. He won a Grade 2 novice hurdle at Naas at the end of last year, beating Beacon Edge, Andy Dufresne and Mount Leinster when going from the front. He was 25 to 1 that day, and he reappeared last week at Ferryhouse in a 10 furlong flat maiden and showed speed and gears to burn when winning and beating a few decent enough horses like Silver Fox and Phil the Pear. So I think this horse could be a real interesting horse, and maybe slightly in the shadows of Captain Guinness, could catch a few eyes in the novice chase division. Number 11 on the list is a flat recruit, and it's Midnight's Legacy for Alan King and the Pitchell Stud Partnership. This horse is still a full horse, and I'm not altogether convinced I amn't just 100% sure that he is going hurdling, but all of his brothers and sisters have all gone juvenile hurdling for Alan King, and this is one of the last cult's still alive and still kicking under the great sire Midnight Legend, and hopefully this horse can do a real good job. I backed him a few times on the flat this year when winning back-to-back handicaps at Haydock, bringing him up to a handicap mark of 90 on the flat. So if he does go juvenile hurdling and can transform that ability, he should take an awful lot of stopping in a lot of juvenile hurdles. The family do well juvenile hurdling, and perhaps and hopefully, given how much the Pitchell Stud Partnership have given to Alan King and given to the game over a number of years, it would be great if this horse was a success and he could maybe go to the breeding sheds and emulate his sire, Midnight Legend. Moving on to number 12, and it is Manila Trump from the Donald McCain yard, owned by Mr. Tim Leslie. He was also came from the Irish Point Fields, bought for 90 grand after winning a Ballycahan point-to-point for John Nallan. This is a really nice horse, and I was really taken by his first 2 wins at Sedgefield last year in novice hurdles. He beat Masters Apprentice by 2 lengths first time out, and then he beat a horse called Ledron by 11 lengths under a penalty, and Ledron has gone on to win 2 of his 3 races since then. He was beaten on Catholic debut and probably giving the winner a little bit too much rope out in front. He was very closely matched with the Cashel Man when I thought he was harshly thrown out in the steward's room at Bangor when he beat the Cashel Man, who'd come so close behind Time Hill in the Shallow the time before. He was a little bit disappointing at Newcastle at the end of the year, but I'm prepared to forgive him that. This horse is a 3-mile chaser in everything he does, and I do think this year, beginners chases and novice chases up north, this horse could go around farming prize money, and I do think he's a real likeable horse for the McCain yard. Number 13 is Ronald Pump for Matthew Smith and the Leash Limerick Syndicate. This horse has been a revelation for Matthew Smith, not the first horse he's done this with. Obviously, One Cool Poet scaled heaps of ranks over the flat last year, and Ronald Pump won his first hurdle race off a mark of 102, and he's managed to convert him into a Stayers hurdle second. And he was probably a little bit unlucky in the Stayers hurdle. Looking at that race back, he was a little bit of a troubled passage down to the last and then bungled the last under Brian Cooper and couldn't quite reel the winner in. I think this horse has a massive chance of doing really well in these Stayers hurdles this year. I think the division is thin on the ground. I don't see that many horses that have brilliant pressing claims for it. Obviously, I'm a big fan of Time Hill, hopefully going into that division this year. But I like Time Hill because he looks like he might be a decent horse. We've Paisley Park with potential heart issues, and the rest of them are probably a bit of a muchness, assuming horses like Benny the Jew don't turn up. I think the likes of the 3-mile Christmas hurdle at Leopardstown and the Galmoy hurdle are going to be pretty weak races, and if Ronald Pump is aimed at these races, which I assume his connections will have to do now, considering handicapping is out of the question, and he just doesn't quite have the physique for chasing, as last year proved, I think he could do really well, and I think there's no reason to suggest why, come next March, he isn't a bang decent each-way chance for the Stayers hurdle once again. Number 14, and our second last on the list, is one of my favourites, as some of you will know. Quick Grab 'em for the Fergal O'Brien team, Mrs. Worcester owns. Used to be trained by Robbie McNamara when he won a bumper at Leopardstown, and then won the Royal Bond Novice Hurdle amongst a few other races when trained by Willie Mullins. He went a little bit off the rails after an injury after the Royal Bond Novice Hurdle, was disappointing at Punchestown, and then he went over to Fergal O'Brien. Now, his 2 runs last year at Kempton were both pretty bleak, but he was in that halfway house where he was too high a rating to be running in handicaps and probably wasn't good enough in open Grade 1 company. He ran in the Christmas Hurdle and the Kingwell Hurdle, 2 good races at that. But what I was really impressed with was this horse's appetite for jumping on Chase debut the other week at Uttoxeter. He was only beaten by Fussell Raffles, who was last year's Christmas Hurdle favourite at Kempton. So there's no disgrace in that. Only beaten in the shadows of the post as well, having jumped for fun out in front. I think this horse shows from that effort that there's heaps of races to be won with this horse over fences. The return to novice company is probably really good for a horse like this as confidence and not having to run in open company for a season. And I really hope he can collect a few novice chases for Fergal O'Brien and hopefully take a decent enough rank over fences this year. And the last one, coming from another northern stable. I am a little bit partial to a northern stable, and it is Weak Field for Brian Ellison and Phil and Julie Martin. Obviously, this time last year I was banging on about Windsor Avenue, and I do think Windsor Avenue but still potentially could turn into a very good horse. This Weak Field, I'm taking a bit of a punt on him. I was at a Cheltenham sale in 2017 when this horse was sold for 90 grand after winning a Port Rush point to point for Gavin Cromwell. The second that day sold for, I think, 165 grand. Horse called Brace Yourself, who's turned into a useful enough horse for no mead. Probably a little bit disappointing as well. This horse was a bit disappointing. His bumper run behind IK Brunel wasn't great. He was stuffed in 2 novice hurdles, but he hacked up on handicap hurdle debut at Market Raisin, and then went chasing last year after start of last year. Around this time last year in October. And he was running at Hexham off a mark of 120 in a novice's handicap, and he won by 12 lengths, but he jumped really pretty slickly. He made a few novice mistakes, but it looked like he was finally coming into his own, now jumping a fence. And after winning an Irish point-to-point, you'd have expected that to be the case. Unfortunately, we didn't see him for the rest of last year, which would temper my enthusiasm. But I do think if this horse can resume to the track and is fitting well, I can see him mopping up a few decent enough handicaps up north for the Brian Ellison team. And hopefully he can go and get us a few winners. So there you go. There's 15 horses to follow for the National Hunt season. Some you'll have heard of, some you mightn't have heard of. And hopefully I'll have put a little bit of food for thought in many of you guys' minds. If you do have horses to follow, preferably not the obvious ones, put them down in the comments down below. And I really hope you did enjoy this video. If you did, please do give it a like and subscribe to the channel down below, and of course let me know your views as I've just mentioned there. And until next time, where we'll be back probably previewing races rather than the season as a whole, I hope you stay safe, stay well, land a few bets, and I'll see you guys soon. Cheers.